it is time for some teams to panic.
Panic! Ah! Ah!
Oh, man. Well, I'm sure that was well. What we're going to do here now for Time to Panic is we're each going to select a team. We are going to pick 1 to 10 on the panic meter. And generally, I think the way we like to do this, and we can say differently for certain teams, is relative to a team and their fans' own internal expectations. How much should they be panicking, right? Like some teams maybe we just didn't believe in to begin with, and yeah, they're fulfilling our expectations, but not the team expectations, but that would still be high on the panic meter. You want to start with the Bulls?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a good one. I mean, I could argue that for their fans, this is a 1. Like, this is exactly what they expected going into the season. Just sort of a inoffensively mediocre team with, 3 guys who don't really fit that well, trying to make it work. I think the thing that sets off the panic meter is that the one thing you hoped for in Chicago was that Patrick Williams could have some kind of breakout that would kind of lift the floor and ceiling of the whole team.
You meaning me? I hoped for that? You meaning me, by which you mean you. Yeah.
A hypothetical third person in the conversation who is not present right now might have hoped
that would be them.
Yeah. And anyway, Patrick Williams has been awful. They oddly went after Javon Carter, who's been fine, but has also blocked out Ayo Dosunmu. And meanwhile, they didn't have any money to spend on a forward, and so they just have Torrey Craig on a minimum deal to replace Williams with. I thought that was a kind of a key mistake there. But big picture, I just don't think it mattered. I don't think they're good enough. I don't think their best players fit particularly well. They're just, they're just cruising toward, 32-50 or so?
Yeah, I was hopeful they could get to 40 wins. That was technically the 8th seed in the East, although all those teams, you felt like somebody below them could pop. I certainly would have given them less than a 50% chance of the playoffs to begin. And of course, the idea was getting back to the playoffs, a pathetic goal in and of itself that they've only accomplished once since they traded away Jimmy Butler, and certainly lost in desultory fashion that season to a Bucks team that didn't even have Chris Middleton. Yeah, I mean, it just, in terms of, maybe you could say, if you're going to say that their goal is making the playoffs, I am not totally going to say that they couldn't do that still. I mean, it's certainly concerning that DeMar DeRozan is playing like a 34-year-old and Nikola Vucevic is playing like a 33-year-old. And Patrick Williams is playing like a 57-year-old. And and Zach LaVine, DeRozan, LaVine, maybe they could shoot a little bit better. But you said it with the 3 players fitting together. There just isn't that much talent on this team, and the net rating for those 3 together is just something god-awful, where at least if you're going to be a playoff team, your starting lineup, your 3 best players should be well into the positive, and maybe your bench doesn't do that well. Who has the most trade value on the Chicago Bulls? I got asked this in my chat on Dunked on Prime yesterday.
Man, I mean, that's one of the things with this stealth trade demand that Zach LaVine has, is with his max deal and his knees. I think he has some value, but I also think it's a little limited because of the contract, the injury concerns, and maybe some of the fit concerns with some of the places he might go. Because of his shooting ability, I do think he's probably a pretty good third option, but it's a third option that makes $40 million, and that's tough to slot in for a lot of teams. And a lot of teams already have a guy at his position who's the first option. So I would say he's still the number 1 guy in trade value. I think a lot of teams would like Alex Caruso, just given the number he's on and the specific skill set he adds. But he's just a much less prominent player. He gets injured a lot. Offensively, he's a little shaky. So he's more like a role player guy. Like, is somebody going to put multiple firsts into a trade for Alex Caruso? I would say there's no chance of that happening. I would say there's some chance of that happening for Zach LaVine.
It all comes back to the money that's coming back to me. And the Bulls, I think they still like say, hey, we're going to totally tear this down again, Spurs style. We're going to go into a rebuild. And the whole thing that apparently Arturis and company sold when they arrived was, hey, we're going to accelerate this rebuild. They made that Vooch trade. You thought maybe they're going to just, we'll do a better job at drafting and developing. And as it turned out, they gave away a bunch of good players who actually could have them being a real playoff team right now. Not that I was like banging the drum for Wendell Carter and Lauri Markkanen at the time. I thought they actually did a good trade there. But it seems like now they're so committed to like trying to be semi-competitive. And it also seems like ownership is committed to just making sure the stadium is full and that they're semi-competitive, and there's like a couple of names that you can sell of like all-stars or former all-stars like they've had.
You know what they are? So, they're Charlotte. They're Charlotte North. They don't want to spend money. They don't want to tank, and they're just content to, like, can we just get the 8 seed? It's actually kind of sad. I mean, this is the Chicago Bulls, right? Like, I don't know. We should expect.
I mean, that Vooch deal. The Vooch deal was just such a low ceiling move. It's remarkable that they made that. They're still out a future pick, although it's top 10 protected, so they may end up keeping that one. But yeah, I mean, clearly just stripped down to the studs is what has to happen here. I mean, they don't have a single. I mean, that's the thing that just kills you is they have made the playoffs once since 2017, and they have no young players at all that you're excited about. And they would say, oh, well, if Lonzo Ball hadn't gotten hurt, okay, yeah, maybe they would have been like slightly higher in play-in consideration, but they still weren't going to win a playoff series with this team.
Yeah.
And okay, Ball has missed a bunch of time. Everybody else on this team has been healthy for the last 3 years, right? Like you'd say,
other than Ball, they were the second healthiest team last year after Sacramento. So that excuse doesn't really resonate with me. They're not very good with not that bright a future. So yeah, I would say very high panic meter there.
And they haven't even really had a particularly difficult schedule, I don't think, either so far. But yeah, I mean, I just like Danny and I talked about them 2 days ago, and I was like, is there a single good story on the Bulls other than Alex Caruso playing pretty well? So, I mean, yeah, maybe DeRozan, that'll be interesting, right? Like LaVine and DeRozan, I think if they can just start playing a little better, they'll boost their trade value. Although, as Casey Johnson noted, then maybe they just hang on to them because they could at least convince themselves that they're going to make the playoffs, right? And that's like if LaVine and Rosen play better, then they'll be back in like play-in contention enough, and maybe they won't want to trade one. But the fact that LaVine has requested a trade, we'll see how that changes the dynamic. So what's your number on them in terms of panic, at least relative to management's expectations?
I think it's got to be like an 8.
Yeah. I mean, they are 4-7, but just the fact that Williams has been so bad that he's lost his starting job and that nobody else on the team is playing well. Like, these guys could be a little bit better, but they're also old enough where they all could be taking a step back.
Yeah.
And
I think this year is just definitive proof to me. Like, they're just not good enough, and they're not going to be.
I guess the other thing, too, is just that, like, if you're going to trade LaVine, you're going to trade DeRozan. If you're not willing to take back bad contracts in exchange, the value, I think, is going to be limited. But if they're not willing to take back bad contracts, they're going to still try to be competitive. The Pacers have been thrown out as a possibility, but I mean, they don't even have a Sabonis on this team to trade right now. And that, like, to get someone young like Halpert, I mean, that was just an incredible heist of a deal for Indiana. Yeah, I think an 8 sounds about right, even considering the pathetic expectations that everyone had for them.